So welcome everyone again. My name is Claire Hofmeyer and I'm the Education and Training Manager at JPAL Africa. I'm joined by a number of my colleagues who you'll hear from in a bit. I'll introduce them now and then you'll see them again. So we've got Vim, who's our Senior Research Manager. Onyinye is our Senior Policy and Communications Associate. Tessie is a Policy Manager in Digify. And Alessia is a Policy Manager working in our Girls Education and Empowerment portfolio. And we're also really pleased to be joined by Kate Orkin, who's one of JPAL's affiliates, who works closely with our research team on interventions in South Africa. All right, so what are we going to cover today? I'm first going to give you an overview of who JPAL is as an organization and the kind of work that we do. Then I'll talk a bit about the opportunities at JPAL, including studying, careers, and internships that we're currently advertising. And in both of these, we'll have some input from the rest of the team. And then we'll have some time for you to ask us questions. So please feel free to ask us anything. And if you have questions before we get to the Q&A session, please feel free to put them in the chat and then we'll get to them during Q&A. And I think everyone already is muted, but we'd just be grateful if you could stay muted during the presentation to avoid any interference. Cool, so let's get going. All right, so JPAL stands for the Abdul Latif Jameel Poverty Action Lab, and it was started in 2003 at MIT in the United States. And in essence, JPAL is a network. This number keeps changing. I've got here more than 225 affiliated researchers, but honestly, that goes up all the time. So it might be quite a lot more than that right now. But it's a lot of affiliated researchers based at leading universities around the world, some of which you'll see on the slide. And you'll see many of these researchers are based in the US and Europe, but we are growing the network to include more and more researchers in low and middle income countries, including quite a few in Africa, such as Ghana, South Africa, Kenya, and Uganda. So there are currently 7 regional offices around the world, as well as our headquarters, which we refer to as our global office. The regional offices are based in North America, Latin America and the Caribbean, Africa, the Middle East and North Africa, Europe, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. And each JPAL office is based at a university and supports work across the region in which it's based. So we're at JPAL Africa, and our office has been open for over 10 years now. And we're within the School of Economics at the University of Cape Town in South Africa. In terms of implementing research, the JPAL Africa team only works on interventions in South Africa. And we'll tell you a bit more about this research shortly. And then for research in other African countries, we work through our sister organization, IPA, or Innovations for Poverty Action, as they have many offices in they have offices in many African countries. So that's kind of who we are. What do we do? So I think, as we all well know, poverty is a complex problem. At JPAL, we approach it by conducting rigorous impact evaluation to shed light on this complexity. We see our work as just part of the solution. It's not the entire solution, but we do think and believe that by testing, innovating, and finding answers to critical questions, we help governments, donors, and NGOs be more effective. And through this process, we collect a lot of data on the poorest individuals in both developed and developing countries. And especially in Africa, this has really opened a window for researchers and policymakers to understand the daily lives of the poor, and it's helped shift our perceptions about people living in poverty. So we have 3 main components to our work. First, there's research. Through what we call initiatives, we raise money from donors to fund new cutting-edge research that answers important policy questions and fills evidence gaps. Secondly, we draw out policy insights from this research and publicize important findings widely. Policymakers don't tend to read academic papers, so JPAL plays a role in translating that work into more accessible formats. Part of policy outreach also includes working closely with specific partners to provide funding, technical assistance, and training to help shape programs and policies that deliver results. And this often involves working directly with government ministries. And so, for example, in South Africa, we have some ongoing work with one of the provincial education departments. And in Nigeria, we're working with one of the state governments to design a program to support girls' agency in education. And then finally, in terms of capacity building, we promote the use of randomized evaluations through in-person and online courses, as well as building freely available tools so that others can conduct randomized evaluations. And I'll link to some of these at the end of the presentation. Just briefly, JPAL sectors are areas in which our research is concentrated around a specific topic. So we currently have 10 sectors shown on the slide: agriculture, education, finance, health, labor markets, etc. And we've got a third one coming soon, focusing on human rights. And then in each of these sectors, we have a team of experts on staff who work with affiliated researchers to share their research with wider audiences and draw out key policy insights. So all of the research that JPAL conducts and supports is based on randomized evaluations or randomized control trials, two different names for the same thing. And these are similar to randomized control trials, or for short, RCTs. These are similar to RCTs in the medical field, and they allow us to take a scientific approach to fighting poverty. And because of the way they're conducted, randomized evaluations can tell us not only whether a specific policy or program had an impact, but also measure the scale of that impact. And if the study was well designed, they can tell us why we see the results that we do. So we can measure impact, size of impact, and the mechanism that brought that impact about. So you probably all well know that there are many types of impact evaluations that we can conduct, such as some of them are pre-post analysis, simple difference, difference in difference, multivariate regression, etc. But the method that JPAL uses is RCTs, or randomized evaluations, because they are the most rigorous way to estimate the causal impact of a given program. So how does it work at its most basic? Just a really short intro to what an RCT is. Individuals are randomly assigned to two groups. In expectation, the two groups have comparable characteristics at baseline. In practice, the two groups may be different from each other due to random variation, but if the groups are large enough, these differences are likely to be negligible at baseline. And then this means that the only systematic difference between the treatment and control groups is that the treatment receives the intervention and the controlled group does not. And if the sample is large enough, we can conclude that any difference at the end of the program between the two groups is due to the intervention and not anything else like the characteristics of the sample or outside events that occurred at the same time. So that's a really quick introduction to RCTs. So our network of affiliates has conducted over 300 randomized evaluations on the African continent specifically, and you may have heard about some of our studies, but I'm going to hand over now to Kate Orkin, who, as I mentioned, is part of our JPAL affiliate network. And she works closely with our research team based in Johannesburg on evaluations in South Africa.
So this was just to give you one example of where evidence has been really concretely...
I can't hear you, Kate. Sorry. Oh. Can anyone else hear Kate?
Yep, clear for me.
And yes, you can hear.
Can you hear now?
Yep, we can hear Kate.
Oh, Alicia is saying she can hear me. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay.
We can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, sounds like that's good. Okay, so this was just to give a concrete example of where randomized evidence has been very effectively used, in the South African context, and I hope that presenting this gives a sense of like why it's quite exciting to be involved in some of these projects. So many of you will know that the global community uses an international poverty line of somewhat having $1.90 a day as a measure of whether a person is living in extreme poverty. We know, although there's been lots of progress in economic growth around the world, we know that globally close to 1 in 10 people live below that line. So they earn less than $1.90 a day. And in sub-Saharan Africa, 37% of people earn less than that. So this remains one of the kind of, it's mind-boggling to think that people still live with that little income, but it's a widely prevalent problem. And so this has been one of the areas that a new JPAL social protection sector has been focused on. And there's a lot of debate about how we design social programs to assist people who live with this level of income both in order to make sure that they can fulfill their basic needs and to try and, as much as possible, get them involved more broadly in the economy so that they can, in the long term, generate income themselves. So if you can switch over. And so there's a, if you can click maybe one or two over. Yeah. So there's a long-running debate in the social policy space. You will have seen this play out in the South African context during all of COVID, like in the newspapers. So it's a very familiar debate. But there's a lot of debate in the welfare space about, if we're trying to assist people who are destitute, who don't have anything, do we do cash transfers or do we do food parcels? So the people who argue for food parcels, and this included many people in South Africa, you will remember when COVID first hit and the economy shut down, loads of people were saying that this was what we should do. And this was actually what government started doing at the start of COVID. The arguments for this are, maybe we can't trust poor people. Maybe we can't be sure that they're going to use the money as we want them to. Maybe, they're going to get hold of it and spend it on something else. And where they're not going to spend it for the best benefit of their children. So, if we give food parcels, we can control what people do. Another argument that is made, this was very common in the media, is that food parcels are less likely to discourage people from working. So maybe if you give people a cash grant, people argue that maybe they won't work anymore. On the other hand, people who argue for cash transfers say, well, cash actually gives people sort of autonomy. It lets them choose what their most important needs are. And also, if you just pump a lot of food aid into a community, you actually destroy local farmers. So maybe if you give people cash, instead they'll buy their food locally. So it doesn't actually undercut local producers. So this debate, was present in South Africa, but it's been going on around the world in many different governments, trying to resolve what the best way is to give this assistance. So in the 2000s, the Mexican government ran a randomized trial of their cash transfer program called Progressa. And then since then, there've been hundreds of RCTs run by people. So I've run some, there've been many other JPOL affiliates who've run them. And those have studied cash grants and sometimes compared them to food parcels. And that evidence has concretely resolved this debate largely. So there's now pretty rigorous scientific evidence, gold standard, very strong, saying, if you give people cash grants, those grants reduce hunger, they reduce meals skipped, they increase dietary diversity for people. So this whole idea that people are not going to spend money on looking after their basic food needs is just not true. We have strong evidence of that. We know that the grants reduce secondary school dropout. They may improve people's cognitive skills. People don't waste the grants. There's over 20 studies saying they don't increase expenditure on alcohol or cigarettes. And there's evidence now from across 7 different studies on multiple continents. There's no effect on whether people work. So, there's this idea that people will somehow be lazy, and if they get income, they're going to no longer work, also doesn't hold true. And we also have evidence that cash gives the same improvements in nutrition as food parcels, but it's much cheaper to deliver. So there's this big evidence base that tells us in this situation, like government has an increase in destitute people. This is the concrete thing that we should do tomorrow that's going to be the most effective and the cheapest that we can actually reach people. And so we had this evidence base when COVID hit, which was very lucky. So if you can go over. And so based on this evidence base, in part, when COVID hit, most countries did cash transfers instead of trying to send out food parcels for COVID relief. So you can see the little table on the right there. This was countries around the world and what measures they did in response to COVID. So it's a report from the World Bank. And you can see that overwhelmingly countries were choosing to give aid as cash grants rather than as food parcels. So that was a much more common method of assistance. And that was partly because of this big evidence base. So in South Africa, we initially delivered food parcels and we really struggled. So it was almost impossible to meet the need. So there were just suddenly hundreds of thousands of people who needed assistance. They had no jobs. Their jobs had been terminated. They couldn't, they had nothing to eat. So it was difficult to scale up food parcels as quickly as possible. And then there were also allegations of corruption in how the parcels were being distributed. The system was just not working. And so I, alongside a team of other JPAL researchers, were commissioned by the presidency to provide advice on what we could do for putting together COVID relief. And so based on this whole international evidence base, we were actually able to put together a series of reports that explained, what the global community had learned about cash grants over the preceding 20 years, and use that in designing how the government put together the COVID relief scheme. And so the advice that we were able to give directly informed the decision both to top up the child grant and the pension, and to put in place the new 350 Rand social relief of distress grant. If you can go to the next slide. And so you'll see this here. So the picture on the right there was one of the reports that we wrote. So we were commissioned by the presidency to digest a range of the evidence that they had about cash grants and food parcels and recommend what to do. And so we recommended, you'll see the simple message in one of the editorials that we wrote, but the simple message was, we need to do food. We have a good cash grant system. We need to scale up cash grants and use that to get money out to poor people as soon as possible. We know that they'll use it well. They're going to spend it on food. They're going to use it to keep kids in school. They're going to use it for basic needs. We have strong evidence of that. And so that was able to give support to the whole, many of you will have seen the Pay the Grants campaign, the big civil society campaign that pushed for the cash grants. But that was able to give kind of concrete evidence from the rest of the world to back up that what they were asking and advocating for actually made scientific sense as well. And so that was a pretty potent combination. We had evidence and we had advocacy, and using that, we were able to really make a pretty big shift in South African anti-poverty policy. It's probably been the biggest change since the child grant was instituted over 20 years ago. And I think that, we as an organization, we worked in partnership as well with some researchers at Saldru who were doing some work on the kind of poverty impacts. And we're really proud of what we've been able to do in the last 2 years. So you'll see some of the figures there. So on the basis of these reports and the kind of RCT evidence that existed, there've been top ups to the child grant and the pension that have reached 20 million people. That's been 45 billion Rand that went out between March 2020 and April 2021. And then we also used the evidence base in the rest of the world to make the recommendations for the COVID special grant. So for those of you who don't know about that, for the first time, if you're an unemployed person, you never used to be covered by the social safety net before. And now you receive an entitlement of 350 Rand every month. It's not a lot, but it is something. And that's been extended a number of times, and we've been arguing a lot for that extension. And so that, we signed up 6 million people in the first month of the grant, and 10.3 million people were receiving it by December. And in the first period that there's been entitlement for that, there's been 65 billion Rand dispersed. So I think you can see for that example, like the generation of this evidence is incredibly important for how ordinary people in South Africa live their lives. And I think we're all extremely excited about the power of generating rigorous evidence and what that can do in really making big changes in government policy. And so we're very excited to try and kind of welcome as many of you as would like to join into that community, and very happy to answer questions about, we'll now go into a little bit the specifics of some of the roles that we have involved. But that's like a best case for kind of the difference that having evidence can make in some of the sort of concrete policy making challenges that the country faces.
Oh, thank you, Kate. Sorry I interrupted you earlier. I was having speaker issues on my side. Cool, that was super interesting. So now I'm just going to take you through, I'll talk a little bit about some of the opportunities, and you'll also now hear more from Kate and Vim and Alessia and Nidhi and Anina about the different internships. All right, so before we get to any kind of internships or career opportunities, I just want to tell you a little bit about more options for study of this topic. So we have a lot of resources available to help you learn about the theory and the practice of randomized evaluations. So there's a free version of the course we run every year in person for implementers and policymakers called Evaluating Social Programs, also referred to as JPAL 101X. And then we have JPAL 102X, which gets into the details of designing and running randomized evaluations. And we have a large library of written resources that can guide you through the research process as well. And then JPAL has partnered with MIT to create the MIT X MicroMasters in Data, Economics and Development Policy, or DDP. So there are 6 courses which you can either audit for free, or you can pay to take a proctored exam and earn a course credential. And if you pass 5 of the 6 courses, you're then eligible to apply for a full Master's of Applied Science in Data, Economics and Development Policy at MIT. And that includes a semester in person at MIT, as well as a capstone project. There are a lot of links there. I'm going to share these slides with everyone who attended after the event. So you'll get all of the links by email afterwards. Now on to careers. So JPAL and its partner organizations recruit for hundreds of positions on a regular basis. Positions can be located at universities, research centers, or nonprofit organizations that are connected to the work of our affiliated professors and partners around the world. And there are many positions offered across Africa, as well as in other parts of the world. So positions include things like field research, project management, data analysis, policy outreach, training, finance, and admin. Really span the gamut of tasks that you can do in this kind of field. And then just focusing a little bit on a research assistant role, working as a research assistant for an evaluation run by a JPAL affiliated professor gives you a chance to work closely with leading academics in the world of development. The typical model is that someone who takes these positions, works in them for a few years, gets a strong recommendation letter from an affiliate, and then uses that to apply for master's or PhD programs at good universities abroad. Not everyone does that, but that is quite a common path. And so if you think you'd be interested in working and studying further in the field of development, then this is a great opportunity to keep in mind. And we're going to hear a bit more about specific research roles at JPAL. And then just there, you can keep up to date with jobs we advertise at JPAL Africa by visiting our careers page or signing up to our newsletter. So now I'm going to hand back over to Kate, who's going to talk about a bit about a research role we currently are advertising for at JPAL.
Well, so this is somewhat related to the work that I was talking about earlier. So that was more on the policy side. So the same team of people also do kind of initial stage research, trying to develop various active labor market interventions. So the broad thing we care about there is, as we know, there's huge levels of youth unemployment. And so we're trying to work with various social partners, so sometimes the government, but also with different NGOs and social enterprises, to try to develop interventions that might help young people be more likely to get into jobs, and then to get into better quality jobs, and to stay in those jobs in the longer term. And so so as Claire was saying, this is going to be a slightly longer term role. So we'd be recruiting for a 1 to 2 year position. This would be for an individual who had a strong technical background. So we've usually recruited people who have a master's degree in economics or a quantitative social science or a related field. And then they would need to be very interested in the practical details of actually running a randomized controlled trial study. So it's in collaboration with me, Rob Garlick, who's an assistant professor at Duke, also a South African academic, who's, so we're working together on the project. So what the project is you will have seen, or many of you may have seen, sayouth.mobi. So this is a new online platform that was launched during COVID. And the idea is to, it's now got over 4 million people on it. It's government supported, and then also supported by a bunch of companies. There are a bunch of different listings for jobs on this platform. And then there's a large network of work seekers. And the work seekers are consistently on the online platform. It's a website. They can fill in a range of different assessments or descriptions of themselves, their career goals. There's like a range of different information that they can fill in. And then they're able to see jobs that are close to them, that are matched to their interests, and apply for as many of those jobs as they're able to. And so we're working in partnership with sayouth.mobi. We've been working with one of the partner organizations now for 6 years, and we've done a couple of really interesting policy evaluations that have delivered some quite cool new interventions. And so we're working with them, and the core thing we want to try to do is develop different ways of screening candidates for entry-level jobs. So currently a lot of firms use a matric, and maybe if you have further school qualifications, but we know that they're very good candidates who don't necessarily have those qualifications, but have a lot of the skills that they need to succeed in the world of work. So, you know, they're flexible, they're resilient, they're good at setting goals, they're good at, you know, delivering, they're good at hustling. And a lot of those things are actually what you need to do well in many entry-level jobs. And so what we want to try and test is ways of measuring the potential that exists in those young people. And we want to do a study to show that, or to test whether if you measure those characteristics of young candidates and you place using those, whether you're able to get candidates who are as good as if you used the old traditional like matric and you know, that way of screening different candidates. So that's the thing that we want to test. We're really hopeful that we can develop a way of you know, measuring candidate skills that is a little bit more linked to the world of work, and that could be more inclusive, so that it doesn't exclude people who haven't managed to get a good matric or don't have a further qualification, but who nonetheless would be really good in a job if they were given the opportunity. And so what you would be doing is kind of holding so you'd be working in the Johannesburg office. You'd be working very closely with us and with the sayouth.mobi, with the partner. And so you would be designing, implementing, and managing various of the data collection activities while we're running the trial, actually programming the survey, making sure that it runs, doing some cleaning and data analysis work once we've completed the trial, and then doing some sort of work, reviewing literature, and then writing reports as well. So, I mean, you can see I'm super excited about the project. It's a really exciting project. And there's an amazing kind of pathway to scale. So, you know, alongside the social grants work, we've been working a lot with the presidency on, you know, the broad idea is that as in the future, as people get social grants, they will also get access to different interventions that might help them find work. And so one of the things that's likely is that over time, they will be referred onto this sayouth.mobi platform if they are young people and eligible, and that they would get various interventions that can help them to find work. So we're working in conversation with government and various NGOs to try and develop what those interventions are. So really excited we hope many of you would apply for this post. So the start date is from May, but we would be looking for a candidate who could start either then or sometime over the winter in South Africa. Then the link to apply can be found there. And very happy to. So I think you know, we have usually taken candidates who have master's degrees for this post, but I think if we you know, if you were going to have an honors degree in economics by that time, we would be happy to consider that as well. So I think you could, you know, if you can get in touch with us if you are in that position, but you know, you don't yet have the or you don't have the master's qualification, but you have completed your honors degree.
Cool. Thanks, Kate. All right. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about the internships we have for 2022. I'm going to give you a broad outline, and then you'll hear more on each specific one. So we have 4 kinds of internships this year. 2 are policy internships, where you'd work with the team running our Digital Identities and Finance Initiative, also called Digify, or our Girls Education and Empowerment portfolio. We have a communications internship, and finally we have a few research internships. And the staff managing each of these teams is going to give you a little bit of detail. With some notes that apply to all of them. Our internships are paid, and they all have a flexible start date of June or July. Apart from the communications internship, which is earlier, it's going to start at the beginning of May. And our policy and communications internships can be remote or in person, while the research internships are in person in the Johannesburg office. And so just a note on eligibility: citizens of any African country can apply to the policy and communications internships, but only those who already have the legal right to work in South Africa are eligible to apply for the research internship. So you don't need to be South African, but you do need to have at least a visa that allows you to work part-time or full-time in South Africa. All right, so let me hand over to, I think it's Tessie or Nidhi, to talk about the Digify policy internship.
Great. Thank you so much, Claire. It's me today. for better or for worse. So hello, everyone. My name is Nidhi, and I'm the director for Digify. And like Claire said, that stands for Digital Identification and Finance Initiative. It's quite a mouthful, so I'd like to take a minute to talk about what we actually do. So what we do is we generate and we fund research on digital identification and payment systems across the continent. We are chaired by two stellar academics, Tavneet Suri, who's based at MIT, and Jenny Aker, who's at Tufts University. We've funded about 29 projects so far in 13 countries. And we work quite closely with both policymakers and academics to build policy relevant research and evaluations in this area. We also have a very strong focus on African scholars, and so we fund African scholars and local researchers as part of our initiative. And we're looking for an intern to help us do a whole host of things. Skills that would be really useful are communication and organizational skills. And some of the key tasks that we envision are helping support our request for proposals, which is our funding decision cycle. And then also helping us with our annual publication and report where we look at what the state of digital IDs are on the continent. Like, you know, Nigeria has NIN, Kenya has a Dumba number, but what's really happening? What are the case studies that we can build on to talk to various governments about? And then finally, our bread and butter is actually building these projects and disseminating findings from the project so that they inform policy. And so the intern would also support on that. And if you're someone who's interested in both research, but also the policy side, this is a really great internship. And if you have any questions, as always, please let me know. And thank you. Look forward to getting many applicants.
Cool, thanks, Nidhi. I think our next one is Alessia with our Girls Education and Empowerment internship.
Thanks very much, Claire. So lovely to see everyone on this call. I am a policy manager for Africa and deal mainly with a portfolio around girls' education and empowerment. And unlike Kate and Nidhi and some of the other people who have spoken so far, we deal with heavily with the policy side of things, which means once we have some really interesting evidence to use and apply, we think about how we can integrate that into policy design. We do a bit less of the generating evidence side of things. So the Girls' Education and Empowerment portfolio tries to improve the lives of adolescent girls by ensuring that policy is informed by scientific evidence. And it's quite a broad portfolio. So we work on education mainly, but also touch on adolescent health, gender-based violence, and other issues that are important to adolescent girls. And we support governments in the design of these policies and programs through a number of different activities. We run local needs assessments to understand the challenges that they're facing on the ground. We also use evidence and run design workshops to think through how to tailor and adapt evidence to the local context. And then we carefully apply it and monitor implementation to check if the programs that we've designed are working correctly. And we mainly do this with governments throughout West Africa. So our flagship project is in Nigeria at the moment, but we're also working in Liberia and Togo. And we're really excited to have an intern on board to help us to sort of grow this portfolio further. We're at a critical intersection for this project with a large pot of funding that we are in the process of receiving, and so keen to expand our activities. And therefore, what the intern will be involved in is primarily scoping opportunities for evidence use and generation in the gender equity space in West Africa, thinking about potential partnerships with implementing organizations or governments and trying to identify who's doing what in this space, and also driving forward our sort of external advocacy agenda by crafting thoughtful communications and thinking a little bit about the key messages that we can draw from the evidence and how to use them. This is a project that can last a long or a short time, but we're really excited to have someone on for the sort of Northern Hemisphere summer months to help us with some time-sensitive projects. Great.
Cool. Thanks, Alessia. All right, over to Aninia to talk about our comms internship.
Thanks, Claire. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you
Okay.
perfectly.
Great. I'm Onyinye, like Claire mentioned, and I lead the communications work at JPAL Africa. Great to have you want to join us. So for the communications intern, we are looking out for a couple of things. We're looking out for people who have great communication skills, so you can speak well, but you can also write well, and you have some experience managing social media. And you'll be doing a couple of things, or what we expect interns to do will be a couple of things. So first of all, we expect you to help out with content generation. So creating tweets for our Twitter page and potentially managing the page as well. But also supporting with blog posts, for example, when we're submitting blog posts to the JPAL blog, but other third-party platforms as well. That's one of the things that you could support with. We also have a content calendar which runs from month to month, so we expect that the intern will be able to support and manage that part of things as well, and then scope out relevant engagement opportunities. I think Alicia touched on this with girls' education, but then you'll be looking at things on a broader scale, on a bigger scale. So you'll be thinking about how can we get JPAL out there and to relevant audiences in Africa. And also you'll be supporting with other deliveries of events, for example, an event like this, but also other events that JPAL might be participating in or hosting. And generally, we just want you to be able to implement our communication strategy. So come with your skills. We're really excited to have you on board. Like Claire mentioned earlier, the applications for this particular role would close in about 10 days time, so on the 15th of April. So try to apply before then. It also can be a remote internship, so you can do this remotely, and we're really looking forward to receiving applications from you.
Oh, thanks, Aninia. And then I think over to Vim on research internships.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vim Lowe. I'm a research manager at JPAL Africa. I support our affiliates and project teams in running studies in South Africa specifically. We are very excited to offer some research internships on our team. This is very much related to the project that Kate was talking about earlier. If you are curious and interested and in research and real-world research and seeing and being exposed to the real practical details of running exciting randomized evaluations, I encourage you to apply for this position. Successful candidates will be basically assisting a live labor market study as it's happening. We're looking for creative problem solvers, and you will be working very closely with me and the project team, including Kate and Rob, and a number of other people in bringing this study to life and really getting into the details of doing this kind of work. We are looking for interns to start around June, July, and yeah, please apply. Looking forward to seeing those applications. Thank you.
Cool, thanks, Vim. All right, so maybe a bit of information about what we're looking for in terms of interest characteristics. Let's think about that first. So we're looking for those who have a deep interest and commitment to our area of work, so using rigorous evidence to improve the lives of the poor. So key for that is people with inquisitive minds who love to learn. Our work is deeply analytical, so understanding causal impact with rigor is hard, whether it's when evaluating a program or thinking about replicating a program in a different context. And so we need people who are driven to solve complex problems, but are also willing to learn from their colleagues and the partners we work with and the people we're aiming to serve. We're also keen to find relationship builders. So at JPAL, we achieve nothing on our own. Whether this is research or policy, we work with partners, and it's key that the people who join us enjoy working with people and developing relationships. both within and outside our team. And then we want to find people who are doers as much as thinkers. We roll up our sleeves. Managing field experiments requires a lot of logistics if you're in a research internship, team management, etc. So we look for people who don't shy away from getting their hands dirty to make things happen. Now, more kind of specifics on qualifications and skills. So for the research assistant roles, we're looking for individuals who have a master's degree in economics, stats, development, or another quantitative social science. But as Kate mentioned earlier, if there is someone who's got a completed honors and you're well suited to the position, you could also apply and we would also consider you. For the internships of all the types of internships, we're looking for people who either have already completed a degree, so an honors or a master's in economics, stats, development, or related field, or are busy with their honors or masters currently. We prioritize great organizational and communication skills for all of the positions. For the policy internships specifically, the ability to speak French as well as English is a big plus. It's not a requirement, but it's a big plus. And then for the research internships, the ability to speak a South African language in addition to English is also a big plus. And the ability to code in R or Stata or a similar language is also highly advantageous. So last plug for why join us. So your work would contribute directly to some of the most important fights of our generation. So we're trying to tackle poverty, unemployment, ill health, poor education, and we're trying to come up with smart, effective, cost-effective solutions that work. So solutions that work and solutions that center the perspectives of the people that the policy aims to reach. You get to work with us, and if we don't mind saying so ourselves, we're bright, committed, dedicated people, and there are many other people in our team who meet this description as well. You get really practical experience of how governments and NGOs work from the inside. And there are lots of opportunities to go on to work in the development field in research or practice after you've done an internship or a different position with us. So for example, South African research assistants have gone on to graduate school at Oxford, London School of Economics, University of California, Santa Barbara, and as well have gone on to work in donor organizations and NGOs. And in our very humble opinion, this is one of the hardest, but also most fun and most worthwhile things you can do with your life. So on that note, I'd like to now allow anyone who has any questions for us. We've got a few in the chat that were also sent in advance by Cedric that I could kick off with answering, and then I'll check the chat and people can also unmute. But let me first address some of these questions because I think they're, thanks, Rano, I'll come to you in a second. That's great to raise your hand. But yeah, Cedric, thanks for sending your questions in advance. I think they're really useful for everyone here. So the first question he sent was, how many applicants will you select for each? So for policy and comms internships, it's 1 each. And for the research internship, there are about 2 or 3. Cedric's second question was, how many applications did you receive last year for each position and what percentage did you accept? So I think last year I wasn't around, but I looked at our application form. I think we received around 150 applications and there were 5 internships filled. Number 3 from Cedric, are non-Southern Africans at a disadvantage? So equal consideration is given to citizens of any African country. So no preference to Southern Africa in specific. But that, as we've said, and I'll state again, for the research internships, you need to have the legal right to work in South Africa. So you can come from anywhere in Africa, but you need to have the legal right to work in South Africa. For policy and comms, you don't need that legal right to work in South Africa, and no preference is given to any region or country on the continent. Fourth question, must applicants be currently studying in Africa? Must applicants be graduates of African universities? So no, you don't need to be currently studying. So you do need to meet that qualifications that we were talking about. So either studying an honors or completed an honors, or studying a master's or completed a master's. But if you've completed an honors and you're not currently studying, please feel free to apply. And you don't need to have gotten that degree at an African university. And then the final question I'll just cover from Cedric is, will there be a pre-selection interview for the internship? And if yes, will the interview be technical, involving things like R or Stata coding and solving statistical questions? So what we do once applications close is we shortlist those that meet our requirements and then send out a test. to those applicants to complete. For the research internships, this will include a component on coding, either in R or Stata. For the other internships, you wouldn't have to do a coding exercise probably, but all intern applicants will also do a component on interpreting the regression results. So you'll be given some information and some regression results, and the questions would be around interpreting those results. And then after that, those who perform well in the test and are shortlisted, then they would do an interview, but the interview itself wouldn't have technical questions or coding type of questions in the actual interview. All right, I see lots of messages in the chat, but let's first go to Joanna because you raised your hand. Would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Thanks for the presentation. I just wanted to ask, you said for the other internships, they're like, they are remote or in person. So if they're in person, suppose someone applies and they have been picked, does that mean that they'll have to like go, let's say, work at the University of Cape Town?
So sorry, for the policy and the comms internships, is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Yeah, so it depends where you are. If you're in Cape Town or Johannesburg, but yeah, and you'd like to be in an office, then we can talk about arranging that, and then you'd be in person. If you're not in either city, but you're selected for the internship, then it would be entirely remote.
All right, okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Cool, pleasure. Okay, I'm gonna see, okay, let me go to the chat. I think Digify asked a question that Kate responded to, I think. Then I've got Zuka Kanaru, sorry, I can't say your name, I'm very sorry. For the RA position, will the RA get the opportunity to co-author the paper? Vim and Kate, maybe you can speak to that. Does that happen? Do RAs?
So yeah, so I can speak to that. So usually the RA positions are for a shorter period of time than the paper goes on for. So, often there'll be 2 or 3 RAs who will work on the paper. So sometimes the RAs, continue in further study or in some sort of academic post, and they would like to continue being involved in the paper. In that case, if the working relationship has worked out well and they've, they want to and they've made a big contribution, then it is possible. It's definitely not guaranteed. So it, depends on both on the RA wanting to keep going after they finished with their role and on there being a good relationship with the team who are running the project. But it definitely is something that we're open to if those things are in place. Often people, finish after 2 or 3 years and then they decide that they want to move on to something else, or they've gone into graduate school and they have too much going on with their studies. So it hasn't happened that often, but it's definitely something that we would think of as a possibility if somebody were keen to do so.
Cool. Thanks, Kate. Next question I've got here from Tochuku. What's the minimum hourly commitment for policy interns? Maybe Alessia and Nidhi could tell us. Maybe Nidhi first. Do you have a minimum hourly commitment on a weekly basis?
So we don't have a minimum commitment. We would like to work around, if you have a part-time job, we can work around that. If you have a full-time job, it's difficult to do this over weekends because we work during the week as well. But we can work around what your commitments are. I would say at least 2 to 3 hours every day, but we can also work on days where you don't have any work on the internship and bump up the other days. Alessia, would you like to add?
Yeah, for the girls' work, it would be great to have someone who has a minimum 12-hour commitment. I think we've worked like that in the past, and it's really just sort of for us the minimum boundary for you to get something valuable out of it, and for us to be able to get going on some of the work that we need to do as well. So I would say I would keep that sort of amount in time as in mind, as Nidhi said. When that happens, if it's concentrated in 1 or 2 days or spread out throughout the week, is pretty flexible, and we can work around your existing commitments.
Cool. Thanks, Alessia. Then maybe you can answer the next one. The question is, if I want to apply for a research internship, but I'm still working on studying R, can I be accepted?
Yes, certainly. I mean, like, it's not a hard requirement. Where, you know, I think Kate's answer to these to the other questions also relevant. If you can show that you have a strong interest and you have some skills in quantitative analysis and thinking quantitatively, I wouldn't try and highlight that in your application. You would definitely not be disqualified if you're not like on top of your R or Python or whatever programming.
Great. I see there were questions higher up that I missed. Can you work remotely as a policy intern while being employed by another organization too? I think so. Sereni? Yeah, I mean, Nidhi mentioned working part-time. I think that's fine. We'd have to just be clear about what time commitment you can make. Cool, thanks, Nidhi. Lowell asked, does age matter? No, I don't think so. It's much more about interest, skills, and qualifications than age. I've got another question. On your website, it's mentioned JPAL Africa cannot sponsor work permits. Does this mean you will not issue official documents attesting a candidate's relationship with your organization, or you will not financially support the obtaining a visa? Both. So we cannot assist with the visa process. Basically, for the research internships, that you need to already have the legal right to work in South Africa, unfortunately, but that does not apply to the policy and comms internships. I think all of the other questions have been answered. Most recent one, if you have a finance degree, what are the chances of getting hired for the RA internships? Okay.
Yeah, so I think this generally applies. So there was also one about if you were in, you know, you had a background in sociology. So I think the two things that it's really useful to show. The one is that you have some interest, and ideally that you actually have some coursework in statistics or sort of quantitative social science of some kind. So I think that you could, if you didn't have that and you did do the, you know, some online courses and things, it would be possible to catch up. But I think without that, it's, you know, that is really, really helpful for the sort of work that we're doing. So I think, you know, for the internships or the policy internships, that's probably less of an issue, but, you know, it is still a really helpful thing because that's the kind of bread and butter of what we do. So I think this, you know, if you have statistics, I would highlight it. If in the internship you, you know, you want to use this to get exposure, but you would like to kind of, you have a kind of concrete plan to keep going with the statistics in the future, I would highlight that as well. So the sort of quantitative social science part is one thing that's quite crucial. And then the other is, you know, just signaling why you're interested in the sort of development space more broadly. And I think we, you know, especially with the internships, we're trying to broaden the set of people who have access to these opportunities. So we're not just thinking about the kind of traditional people that we used to have from an economics background. We are trying to broaden out. That's why we're running the program. So I think if you don't have those, either of those, you know, ways of demonstrating that, you know, you've done some statistics or you have any development background, then I think it's, you know, just tell us your story in your application. Make sure we really understand why you want to do this, you know, where you think this would take you, and really show that in general you're a motivated person who's keen to try and pick up new skills in the areas where you don't have those skills already. So, you know, we do want to try and be inclusive, but, you know, those two things are a benefit if you have them. And if you don't, I would try and say, you know, this is why you really would make a good candidate for other reasons, or, you know, this is how you might be prepared to do some of the work to get some of the background that you didn't have if you needed it. I hope that's a kind of clear enough answer. So, you know, if you don't meet some of the criteria, my advice would probably be put in the application, but kind of explain why this is important to your trajectory and where you're going, you know, and how you would work to, if you didn't have some of the prerequisites, how you would work to catch those up. That doesn't apply for I think that applies for sort of the qualifications. If you're missing one of the pieces, it is very difficult for us to do anything about the work visa thing for the RA, the roles that are in person. So I think that, unfortunately, the policy internship is more the path that would work for that.
links to those study opportunities, to applying for the internship if you haven't yet applied. Got the application deadline on the screen now. All right, I think we'll end it there then. Thanks very much for joining us. Thanks for your questions.